Hi class, we're going to move now and talk about chapters 5 and 6. There are a number of slides here in these presentations, and I think it's about 60 something on between these two chapters. I don't expect you to know all of that information. That's pretty much pulling it right out of the book. I'm going to go through this as quickly as I can, just point out that which is the most important that I want you to take note of. I want you to understand the definition of a gang. There are numerous definitions depending on who you talk to and where exactly they have studied. We have Thrasher, we have trying to Klein and Maxon, Curry and Decker, they all give us different definitions of gangs, but the most unified is that it includes persistence over time. They have lasted more than just one event. They participate in illegal activity. Sorry about that. That's one of our protectors here in this gang infested area. Let's continue back. Talking about definition of gang, they congregate in public. They usually congregate in one specific identified area. They have their own turf. 1783, youthful gangs emerged in New York City. They were largely related to the growth of the major cities. It's a propensity for juveniles to act in groups. They feel, most juveniles that join gangs, they feel rejected at home. They don't have that attachment or that inclusion at home. And it's not because the parents are doing it out of choice. Most parents, most of these children are coming from one family households and one income households. And that one parent is working multiple jobs and may have an older sibling watching and taking care. And that child doesn't feel any involvement at home and just ends up on the street, and they feel very accepted by the gangs. These, especially when they're recruiting, they'll bring them in, make them feel like they're a part of the family, when in actuality they won't. They'll turn on them just as quickly as they'll turn on other gangs, other members of other gangs. There are specific characteristics for gangs. As Thrasher has defined a gang, it is a group formed spontaneously and integrated through conflict. It has a movement through space as a unit, conflict, and planning. It is a development of tradition, unreflective internal structure. The National Youth Gang Survey also has a definition as well as Klein and Maxim, Curry and Decker. There are typical elements of the gang. You have a group. It's usually a specified number. They have certain symbols, hand signs, colors, clothes, a name. They'll come up with their own name that defines who they believe they are. Communication. They communicate in their own way. Many times they have their own language. They persist over time, as I mentioned. They have their own turf, and they are involved in criminal behavior. Gangs defined again, therefore, are the 5 general elements: criminal activity, a hierarchy or leadership structure, meaning that there is someone at the top that's usually making most of the major decisions, a minimum number of participants, and some common name or symbol, and an alliance. As I mentioned, a lot of this is repetitive. You're welcome to go back through and review this again. Most juveniles are aged 11 to 17. What we find is when juveniles move to middle school out of that nurturing environment in grammar school, this is at a point where they can become a victim. And if they don't want to be a victim, they become a member of a gang. So it's usually 13, 14, 15 that we see the main congregation of age. This is just more research on the early information on gangs. There's been a number of research and studies conducted on gangs, and what's interesting about gang behavior, when these researchers and experts go down and discuss with the gang members, they're very quick to bring them in. Let me show you what we do. Many times they do cover their face. They don't show you, they won't let you know where they are, or they won't let you report where they are. But they're very invitational. As I said, the National Youth Gang Survey is available through the Department of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. You can read the gang survey and the numbers that are involved in every state across the country. As you can see, the prevalence has remained about the same according to the agencies that report gang problems. Gang problems are in every corner of this country. Uh, you will see smaller gangs, and of course they're involved in criminal activity. So wherever you see criminal activity, you're going to see gangs. When we think of gangs, we think of Chicago, we think of Detroit, and yes, those are extensive, and in California. As I said, peak ages 14, 15. Individuals can stay in a gang up through their 20s. In fact, it's very difficult to get out of a gang, even when you are one of in the higher hierarchy. Vast majority are in low class areas. There are still gangs within the middle class and other classes, but it's predominantly in the lower class, and that's because, like I said, they're single family households, and those juveniles are just finding camaraderie somewhere. Most of them are Hispanics, comprise about 50%. There's been a major increase in the number of Hispanics in gangs. African Americans contribute about 35%, and there's not too many whites in the gangs. Now, there is more white activity in the Midwest. Females, there's an overwhelming dominance of males, but there has been an increase in female gangs. And in fact, females have been um, engaged in male gangs, but as you will read, they have to go through a membership and an initiation, and usually that's getting beat up by somebody and by the whole gang. And so a female has to be able to go through that to become an autonomous member. So that's what's made about the production of more female gangs. This is just another definition of Klein and Maxon gangs type: traditional, neo-traditional, compressed, collective, and specialty. The heart of most gangs is the core of the devoted members. I want to point out that, or right here, about some gangs have differentiated leadership, meaning that they have different talents. Someone may be the criminal mastermind that has an access to a bank or access to certain kinds of documents, and they may be the ones that plan the crimes. There may be the ones that plan the attacks on other gangs, and so forth. Gang migration. Gang, as I've said, has moved across the country, and it'll move from, it's gangs tend to stay within one central area. So when you hear of a gang of the same name in another area, it's usually because they have borrowed that information from them. Again, why do they join gangs? They find support and unity with others that can offer them status and a sense of success, as well as they have that sense of belonging and they are no longer the victim. When we think of gangs, we think of that violent activity, and we assume that it's going on all the time, and that's not necessarily true. They hang out together and they participate in illegal activities, in that drinking, drug use, partying, gambling, but it's not predominantly just that violent. What happens in these gangs, and there's a really good book, and I'll pull it up here in a minute. It talks about a gang member from California in Los Angeles, and he's just riding his bike down the street at 14 years old, a bicycle, and he has his gun in his back pants, and he gets attacked, and he jumps into a bush in front of somebody's house, and it's a drive-by, and these other gang members are shooting at him, so he just gets back on his bike and pedals back to where his friends are, and they come back to defend him. There is a lot of drug activity in gang behavior, and a lot of that's because that's where they're making their money. They have to have some kind of financial support, and they do this through the distribution of drugs. As I said, the bulk of the violence is aimed at other gang members. Roughly 5% of all homicides are gang related. What's an interesting, as I read in a an article just recently that I read about gang activity in prisons, and individuals, juveniles, and we're talking predominantly males, who commit homicide as a gang member, they are more likely to commit another homicide in prison as well as when they get out. And when we talk about it, I know the questions come up, well, how do they get out if they committed homicide? Many times they're not in prison for a homicide, or they are in for manslaughter. They plea out, they get in, they get out, but we find that their violence will continue if they are involved in a gang. And here is just a quick table that shows you that the larger cities have more homicides that are related to gangs. As I said, most violent appears it's drive-by shootings, it's a single member of a rival gang. It appears random, but many times they're out. And what's interesting is you hear is it's true, they're not necessarily planning an attack unless they've been attacked upon, but they will just be out driving and see a rival gang member and take out and shoot. They some tend to specialize in their criminal activity, meaning that they have a certain criminal crimes that they own. They may be the ones that predominantly rob liquor stores. They might be the ones that deal the drugs. They might be the ones that traffic the drugs. Criminologists, as long as I've been reading and as long as I've been one, have been researching gangs. And as we talked about with social disorganization and Sean McKay's theory, they looked at gangs in order to try to explain the violent behavior and the behavior behind joining, and how, in other words, what we're trying to do is prevent future violence. So what we look at is we have a couple of different models. We have the selection model where they recruit or they attract. We have the social facilitation model that belonging to a gang is the cause of an increased deviance. In other words, if they had to join a gang, they would not have been involved in criminal activity. We have the enhancement model, which is the middle ground, and where gangs recruit delinquency prone youth to enhance their deviancy. So they know this guy, they know that, hey, Bob over there has committed a number of crimes, but he's not in a gang. Let's recruit him and get him in here with us. Do gangs cause delinquency? As I just said, it may cause increased delinquency, but the enhancement model is the most likely. In other words, that they will recruit the delinquency prone youth. Most gangs are not going to recruit a student that they know is not going to be involved in their behavior. And I don't mean that derogatory in that the A student cannot be involved in criminal behavior, because they can. What I mean is that youth that might have a better direction and have a better family life that's going to try to pull them away from the gangs. They wouldn't have that automatic deviance apparent to the gang members. These are some of the most common intervention strategies in order to intervene into the gang activity. Like I said, our goal is to stop gangs. We have suppression, social intervention, organizational change and development, community organization, and opportunities provision. As I said, there has been law enforcement and advocates trying to stop gang behavior that have infiltrated and spoken to them and tried to redirect them. And it happens when they're in prison as well. Gang intervention, researchers have based what we know on actually speaking to gang members. As I said, they're very willing to discuss. Here are some other ways to intervene in the gang violence, and that you spend considerable time in the neighborhood. And if they become to trust you as a researcher, as an expert, they're more apt to tell you all that's going on, and how to, even if you understand how it began and how it proceeds, you can learn how to stop it. There is the California STEP Act of 1988 that is enhancing enforcement and prevention. And this act criminalized membership in a street gang. In other words, there's other laws too that we've talked about in other classes, that where just being a member of a gang